And a good Friday morning. Thank you so much for joining us here on NewsNation Now. I am Aaron Nolan. We are updating a story that topped our newscast last night on WGN America as 13 have been charged in plots against the Michigan governor to kidnap the Michigan governor. We're delighted right now to have the Attorney General for Michigan, Dana Nessel, joins us. Dana, thank you so much for joining us here on NewsNation Now.
Thanks for having me.
Attorney General, first off, let's talk about what's happening right now, and then we'll get into as much of the particulars of what happened as you were able to give us. But what is happening right now? We are reading reports that the governor has been moved from different locations there in the state.
Well, I mean, she's certainly been apprised of everything that's happening during the course of this investigation as it pertained to her. Of course, remembering that there's a lot more to all of this than just the plans that involved the governor. There were plots to, take over the state capitol, to execute people involved with law enforcement and other public officials. But yes, the governor has been made aware of anything pertinent to her or her family's safety. So the number one goal, of course, is to make sure that nobody gets injured and nobody gets harmed. So her detail is always aware of what's happening in our investigation.
How long had this investigation been going on? When did you first hear about the possibility of these plots to kidnap the governor?
Well, this has sort of been an ongoing thing throughout the course, I would say, really, of the pandemic, when these groups had been around and we were aware of them. But in terms of an escalating activity, an increase of membership, I would say that after the pandemic hit and the governor was forced to issue really a slew of executive orders in order to combat COVID in our state, that's really when things began to escalate and we saw more and more happen. And of course, I'm sure you covered the protests that occurred in April and in other times at the Capitol building. You saw armed gunmen seemingly take over the building and threaten some of our public officials. And, these were really, I would say, recruiting stations for some of these individuals. And they began to gain more in the way of membership. And their plans started to move forward.
If you're just joining us here on NewsNation Now, the Attorney General from Michigan, Dana Nessel, joins us talking about a plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan. Interesting things here as we talk about this. I think the governor yesterday was speaking, and she said that she understood what she was getting into, but didn't think that it would go to anything like this. What were the conversations like, as much as you can tell us? And I understand much of that is personal conversation, but when you had to tell the governor that there was, in fact, a plot to kidnap her, and your office had to look into something like this.
Well, the thing is, we had seen threats very publicly made for months and months. So there really wasn't a day, I'm sure, that the governor could take a look at her Twitter feed or her Facebook account and not see the threats that were perpetually being made against her. So this could not have come as a surprise to her at all, unfortunately. But this is the angry rhetoric that we've been seeing now over the course of several years. And a time was, of course, that you did not see an abundance of this the way you do now, but for some reason it's just sort of fair game to threaten public officials at will. And so to know that there was something behind all of the public rhetoric that you saw, and that there were actual plans in place that were being made, and that there were tactical trainings, and that a multi-jurisdictional basis, you had a number of individuals, of course, that were collaborating together and conspiring to actually execute these activities. I don't know that it should come as a surprise to anyone right now.
Was there any urgency to make this known yesterday and make these arrests when this had been building for months, as you said? Was there anything imminent that was happening, in the next coming days, weeks, months that you felt that you needed to go now?
Well, first of all, I think there was a concern that something might happen prior to the election. But in addition to that, there was certainly enough there that we felt as though it was important to go ahead and to issue arrest warrants and search warrants. And as I often say, I'd really rather have a more imperfect conspiracy case than the most solid homicide case. And not to say that these cases aren't extremely strong and compelling with substantial evidence, because they are. But at a certain point, you really don't need any more evidence, and you have to be worried that at any moment these actors could move forward and actually execute the plans. And then, you'd never want to be in a position where you say, I wish I wouldn't have waited so long, because we could have saved lives. And so certainly there was enough evidence to go ahead and to take these individuals into custody.
All right, so 13 arrested. What's the majority of the charges that these individuals are facing?
Well, it varies. The federal charges focus more on the effort to kidnap and then, put on trial and potentially execute the governor. The state charges that we have are domestic terrorism-related charges, gang-related charges, and weapons-related offenses. So they vary, but they all involve really the same types of activities. But I think it's important to remember that, these individuals, these groups, they're not the only ones that are out there right now. And we have seen just an exponential rise in activity by these groups, membership of these groups, and the number of these groups that are out there. So I don't think this is the last time that we're going to see something like this in the news cycle, unfortunately. And that's why I think it's so incredibly important that leaders that are in positions of power ensure that they unequivocally condemn white supremacy, condemn extremism and these types of ideologies, and indicate they're not going to condone it. And unfortunately, I think that some of the statements that, for instance, the President of the United States have made has only encouraged individuals like the people that were arrested in the last few days. And it's very concerning to me. And I hope that people appreciate that these are not just words when they are uttered at the highest levels of government. They're rallying cries, and they incite and encourage individuals like the defendants that were arrested involving these particular cases.
Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel is our guest here on NewsNation Now, talking about 13 arrested in a plot to kidnap the Michigan Democratic Governor, Gretchen Whitmer. How did you work with the FBI, and were you able to track any of these groups via social media?
So these groups do tend to use social media quite a bit, but they also used other types of platforms that were a little bit more secretive, but they certainly use Facebook in order to recruit membership, and when they're having an event that is a public event, to try to get as much in the way of attention, as many people out there as possible. And I will say this, I mean, what's particularly concerning is some of these events, you actually have public and elected officials at these events, sheriffs at the events. Our Senate Majority Leader attended some of these events. And what's very concerning is that, of course, it adds legitimacy to the work that these covert groups are actually doing. And I think, again, it encourages them. But, you can actually take a look at some of these events where these individuals were on a stage and speaking, and you can see state senators, state reps, and sheriffs standing alongside them. It's a grave concern to those of us in law enforcement.
Do you think Michigan's become a hotbed for these type of groups? You've spoken about different events there in your state, as well as this plot that was months in the making.
Well, unfortunately, Michigan has had a militia issue for many years, and you can trace that all the way back to the Oklahoma City bombing, when the Michigan militia was involved in that. I think things died down for quite some period of time, but really in the last handful of years, things have ramped up and escalated substantially. But this isn't just a Michigan problem. Let's be clear, this was multi-jurisdictional. These trainings and meetings occurred across many states. There are other actors involved in other states as well. This is not a Michigan problem. This is now an American problem.
As we begin to wrap up here, how is the governor doing today with all of this news breaking yesterday that there was a plot to kidnap her? How is she handling this news, as I'm assuming now these 13 people behind bars gives her a little bit of comfort?
Well, she's shaken a little bit, but she's as determined as ever. And I will say something about Governor Whitmer. She is a very strong person. She's a strong individual. And I know that she is determined to keep our state safe. And that particularly is true as it pertains to the COVID epidemic, which has raged across our state just as it has the entire nation and across, the globe. So I don't think that this is going to get in the way of the work that she's doing. And obviously, precautions have been taken in regard to her security detail. And, they're doing everything they need to be able to do to protect her. But she's doing everything she needs to do to protect the rest of us in this state from COVID and from other safety and security issues. So I don't think it's going to stop her from doing the things that she needs to do and that she always has done.
Attorney General, what is next in this case?
Well, there are going to be preliminary hearings. Calendar conferences have been scheduled. At this point, I think the majority of the defendants have all been arraigned. They're certainly all in custody right now. So the cases will move forward. There will be, on the state level, there'll be probable cause conferences, preliminary exams scheduled, and then cases will be scheduled for trial.
Are you working on any other cases involving groups like this?
Well, I will tell you that certainly our task force, the Michigan State Police, the Department of Attorney General here, and of course the federal, U.S. attorneys and FBI, we continue to work together. We continue to monitor groups, and again, not just in Michigan, but in several other states as well. And I can say this, if people who are involved in this kind of activity think that they're not being watched and no one knows what they're doing and that they can get away with these types of criminal acts, they should really think a little bit more carefully and consider the very serious charges that have been levied now against these 13 individuals. And it should serve as a deterrent to them.
All right, Attorney General Dana Nessel, thank you so much for taking the time here on NewsNation Now, as again, this has been an extremely busy time for you in that state, as well as a story that many of us are following. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Again, you can find much more of this on newsnationnow.com. We'll also have more on this as the story continues to develop tonight, starting at 7 o'clock Central on News Nation. That's on WGN America. For now, that's all we have from the News Nation Now studio. Have a great morning.